forgetfulness, disorientation, confusion, loneliness. These are just a few of the symptoms someone suffering from dementia may experience. Now, dementia is a psychiatric disorder that may affect you or someone very close to you. You think not? So Psychiatric Services, a government organisation, state that between 15 to 20% of people suffer from a psychiatric disability sometime in their lives to the extent where they need professional assistance or intervention. That means at worst 1 in 5 people will be affected by some form of mental illness. How many people do you know? How many people are you close to? 5? More? Chances are you will have known someone who has a mental illness. 25 years ago, you may never have seen these people. They'd have been institutionalized, locked away. And now, with community support, they're able to stay longer within their own homes. And within the community, those people who were once disregarded can look forward to a better quality of life. Worrying things began to happen. On occasion, she would be found wandering the neighbourhood, not knowing which house was hers. She would turn on the oven, forget to light it, prepare a meal, forget to eat it. Well, growing old doesn't mean losing one's memory or even losing one's mind. We all forget things from time to time, but when that forgetfulness disrupts one's whole life, then perhaps dementive illness may be the cause. The word dementia refers to a group of illnesses that affect the brain physically and impairs one's mental abilities. Now, years ago, we knew this simply as senility. But today, as dementia, this group of illnesses affects something like 100,000 Australians. And it doesn't have anything to do with old age either, because even though it affects mainly people in their 60s and beyond, people in their 20s, 30s and 40s can also be afflicted. Now, the task of caring for people with dementia usually falls upon the shoulders of close relatives. But as Dawn Fisher of Frankston Mental Health says, the task is a very onerous one, and many will seek support.
Dementia has a devastating effect on both the family and the person with the disorder. Carers not only have to cope with the burden of care, they have to watch someone they love gradually change into a stranger. Carers tend to become socially isolated. Friends gradually stop visiting because they become embarrassed and aren't able to cope with the situation, and the carer is no longer able to get out to attend social clubs and things that they enjoy doing. Even shopping becomes difficult. The caring role goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, over many years. Dementia is not a diagnosis in itself. It's the name given to a group of symptoms that are a result of brain damage. The main characteristics are deterioration in memory, changes in personality, impairment of judgment and intellectual function. Quite simply put, dementia is a loss of mental capacity. There are many causes of dementia. Trauma or head injury, tumour causes dementia. A particular dementia, Jacob Creutzfeldt's disease, is caused by slow virus disease. Progressive neurological diseases can result in dementia. Diseases like Parkinson's disease and Huntington chorea. Toxins can also cause dementia. Alcohol, toxic fumes, glue sniffing can result in dementia. And there are hereditary causes for a particular dementia by the name of Pick's disease, and there are many other causes. The 3 main types of dementia I'm going to talk about are alcohol dementia, which accounts for about 10% of all dementias. The second largest cause of dementia is multi-infarct dementia, which accounts for about 20 to 25% of all dementias, and Alzheimer's disease, which is the largest cause of dementia, accounting for about 50% of all dementias. I'll describe the 3 types in more detail, starting with alcohol dementia. The age of onset can be very early, and I know somebody who was affected by alcohol dementia in their late 20s. The cause of the disease is, as the name suggests, alcohol, and the progress of the disease of the dementia is a gradual deterioration. There's a gradual deterioration all the time the person is drinking. If they stop drinking and have a good diet with vitamin supplement, they will improve and level out, and they'll stay at that level unless they start drinking again. If they do start drinking again, you get the deterioration when they stop drinking, an improvement, and they level out.
Dawn, what are some of the problems that people can expect if they have alcohol dementia?
With alcohol dementia, there is short-term memory loss, which means that the person may not remember what happened a few moments ago, a few hours ago. They may not know what they had for breakfast. They may not know what they've just had for lunch. What they might do is appear as though they do know what's going on by a technique that we call confabulating. They're not actually telling lies. What they tend to do is say what they think might have happened or what they might have had for breakfast. Quite often with alcohol dementia, the mid-term memory and the long-term memory can also be affected. There's often not complete loss, but the memory is a bit patchy.
Well, it sounds as if it would be very difficult for people to get by with this memory problem. So what can they do to cope with this illness?
Alcohol dementia can be coped with in the community by use of a diary and regular routine for the person, regular daily routine. For example, the person gets up in the morning, the first thing they do is look at their diary to see what to do next, and the diary might say, have a shower, get dressed, go to Milk Bar for paper, have breakfast, etc. So the daily routine is mapped out in the diary. They basically need that routine to get them into the habit of doing the same thing day in and day out. Because of their short-term memory, that's the only way that they can manage in the community with basically memory joggers. There is no real treatment for alcohol dementia. Once the brain is damaged, that damage cannot be repaired. The main treatment is to stop alcohol intake and to have a good diet with increased supplements of vitamin B and usually C. The second most common type of dementia is multi-infarct dementia. This accounts for about 20 to 25% of all the dementias, and the age of onset again can be quite early. I've known somebody in their mid-30s to suffer from multi-infarct dementia. The cause of multi-infarct dementia is small strokes or bleeds into the brain, which cause the cells to die off. These infarcts may go unnoticed, and all the person might experience is a period of increased confusion or a period of just not feeling well. If the infarct's a bit larger, they might have more problems, but quite often they do go unnoticed. The progress of the disease of the dementia is said to be stepwise. The person has an infarct, they deteriorate dramatically, improve a little, and then level out. And they may stay at that level unless they have another infarct. And again, they'll deteriorate, improve a little, and then stabilise. The part of the brain that's affected by the infarct decides on the part of the person's function that's involved. For example, if the infarct affects the speech centre, the person may have difficulty either expressing themselves, understanding what's being said to them. They might have difficulty with words, difficulty with name finding. People with multi-infarct dementia often get spatial discrimination problems, where they're not sure where they are or where parts of their body are in space. For example, you can be going down steps with somebody with this type of dementia. You might ask them to step down, and in fact they put their foot upwards. This is because they don't know where their foot is in space, and this also has implications for dressing and doing household tasks.
Are there other problems associated with multi-infarct dementia?
There may be some memory problems. Again, the short-term memory may be affected, or it may be other memory. It may be other parts of the memory. Sometimes the short-term memory can be quite good, but the mid-term memory or the long-term memory may be patchy. The third type of dementia I'd like to talk about is Alzheimer's disease, which is the biggest cause of dementia in Australia today and accounts for about 50% of all the dementias. It was first described in 1907 by Alois Alzheimer, who was researching changes in the brain after death of a group of people with similar symptoms. He discovered certain changes in the brain, which he described as neurofibrillary tangles and protein plaques, which interfered with the transmission of messages from one cell to another. And so he discovered a new disease called presenile dementia or Alzheimer's disease. These changes are gradually become widespread throughout the brain, so eventually affect all the person's personality, the whole of the person's personality and their ability to function. The progression is a gradual deterioration. I wish to stress quite strongly that Alzheimer's disease is not part of normal aging process. There is some decrement in memory and in language with normal aging, but that is quite different to the changes that we see in Alzheimer's disease.
It's very strange. I have days when I'm perfectly normal. I don't forget anything, and I ring up my friends and talk to them. Sometimes I should have done something and I forget. My daughter's very good, she reminds me. But that goes in spills. And sometimes I get so cross, I think, well, there's nothing wrong with me. Why are people saying that there's something wrong with me? As I say, I've always had a wonderful memory. And now I stand there sometimes and thinking, what have I come in here for?
It's said that 100,000 Australians have Alzheimer's disease, and in Victoria the number is about 25,000. However, we're told by the year 1996 it's thought that these numbers will double. Alzheimer's disease is age-related, which means the older we get, the greater risk we have of being affected by the disease. About 5% of people over the age of 60 are affected by Alzheimer's disease, and 20% of people over the age of 80 are said to have Alzheimer's disease.
Occasionally we all read or hear about the causes of Alzheimer's disease. What are some of the latest theories?
One of the areas that's being researched quite extensively in Victoria at the moment is the link between aluminium and Alzheimer's disease. It's known that there's aluminium deposits in the neurofibrillary tangles in the brain of people suffering with Alzheimer's disease. Another area being researched is that there's a lack of a chemical that's normally present in the brain in people that have Alzheimer's disease. There is a theory that it may be caused by a slow virus, but I think most research is being done to rule out this rather than the fact that people suspect that might be a cause. It's thought that Alzheimer's disease could be due to autoimmune disease, which is basically the body killing off its own brain cells. And another theory that's quite extensively pushed is nutritional deficiencies. But basically, I think many people think the cause may be multifactorial, in that some people are born with a predisposition towards the disease, but this is affected by environmental factors.
My name is Dorothy, and I have got Alzheimer's disease. I suppose we never think about these things, do we? None of us know what's around the corner, do we? If anybody had told me this would happen to me, I would think they were mad.
Alzheimer's disease is said to progress in 3 stages. I'll describe these stages in detail because if you have some idea of what is happening, it's easier to understand the person and to manage different aspects of their behaviour. The first stage often goes unrecognised. The onset is very gradual, usually over a period of several years, maybe up to 5 years. The person has short-term memory problems and is usually able to cover up this memory impairment by writing notes to themselves.
Now, just a minute. I write notes to myself to remind me of dates, activities, even shopping lists. Does that mean I've got Alzheimer's disease?
We all write notes to ourselves, but the difference is that you and I may forget to take our shopping list shopping. However, when we get to the supermarket, we remember that we've written a note and we remember that we've left it at home. Somebody with Alzheimer's disease wouldn't remember that they'd written a note in the first place, and that's the difference between somebody who doesn't have Alzheimer's disease and somebody who does have Alzheimer's disease. Quite often in the early stages, there are other problems. The person might become a little bit irritable, not quite themselves, and quite often people tend to cover up and make excuses. The person may not be feeling well, may have a few family problems, may need a rest or a holiday. So workers and friends do tend to make excuses. One of the first things that's noticeable is the person does tend to forget people's names. People that he's known for many years cannot remember their names when they visit. There's often some disorientation in time in the first stage. The person isn't quite sure which day of the week it is, or even what part of the day it is, whether it's morning or afternoon. Again, in the first stages, there are often changes in personality. The person might become somewhat suspicious. He puts something down, can't find it, and accuses somebody else of taking it. Also during the first stage, friends might notice changes in the person's hygiene. Usually somebody who's normal, fairly fastidious, might go out with food stains on their clothes, might even forget to have a shower at times. By the second stage, it's pretty obvious that something's wrong. The memory becomes much worse. The short-term memory goes first, then the mid-term, and the long-term memory tends to stay intact till fairly late in the disease. There's more disorientation. First time when the person doesn't know what day of the week it is, which month of the year, what season, even what year it is. Then they may become usually they become disorientated in place next and will often get lost. They'll often wander out of the house, maybe to go shopping, and not be able to find their way back. If picked up by the police and asked their address, will often give the address where they were born rather than the address in which they're presently living. That's because quite often their long-term memory is still intact and they remember things that happened earlier on in their life, sometimes in quite minute detail, where they were born, the names of friends, childhood friends, that sort of thing. But if you ask them something that happened earlier that day, what they had for lunch, they won't remember it. A person with Alzheimer's disease will become disoriented in person, and they'll fail to recognise old friends, maybe family members, usually grandchildren first, then their children, but tend to remember their spouse for quite a long time into the disease. People with Alzheimer's disease also lose the ability to read and write, and that has implications for legal matters and signing legal forms, etc. People with Alzheimer's disease lose the ability to perform tasks of daily living, tasks like cooking, cleaning, dressing, showering, and often become quite dependent on others for these daily needs. They also have problems with communicating. Initially, they have difficulty expressing themselves, and later difficulty understanding what is said to them. They also fail to recognise familiar objects. You could put a comb into the hand of somebody with Alzheimer's disease and they may stand and stare at it, not knowing what to do with it. This failure to recognise familiar objects and loss of understanding has implications when asking somebody with Alzheimer's disease to do something. For example, you could ask them to put some rubbish into the bin and they stand and stare at you. Basically, they might not recognise a bin for what it is, and they might not have understood what you said anyway. During the second stage, there are also personality changes as more brain cells become involved. For example, aggression, maybe sexual disinhibition, but these periods are usually fairly short-lived. However, 2 to 3 weeks to someone caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease can seem more like 6 months. It's also important to remember or to realise that people with Alzheimer's disease are unable to learn new skills. Quite often, if we try to teach them new skills, they can become quite angry and aggressive because we're reinforcing their deficits. By the third stage, the person is completely dependent on the carer for all their daily needs, often following the carer around everywhere and not able to cope with anyone taking the carer's attention from them. At this time, it's usually at this time that they go into long-term care. From the sufferer's perspective, they often become depressed. If they have some insight, they often realise what is happening to them. They often know they're a burden and are often quite concerned about their spouse. They often become frustrated and angry, and this in turn is often made more difficult as they lose the ability to express their feelings. At present, there's no known cure for Alzheimer's disease, so treatment is to treat the various symptoms as they present. The aim of any treatment being to keep the person in the optimum of both physical and psychological health.
Well, what problems are carers likely to encounter when they're visiting or working with people who suffer from dementia?
People visiting or working with those with Alzheimer's disease may encounter several problems. Firstly, gaining access to the house may be quite difficult. If this is the case, it's often advisable to contact a neighbour, a relative or a friend and ask them to be there when they visit to enable you to get through the door. Subsequent visits are often easier once a person learns to recognise your face. Quite often, the person doesn't want help from anyone, and it may take several visits to establish a really good rapport with the person. There's no point in going into the house and say, I've come to clean up for you today, and expect to be shown the cleaner and told to, okay, get on with it. It takes a long time to sit and talk to the person, maybe have a cup of tea with them, and it may take several visits before the person will actually let you help them. People with Alzheimer's disease often become quite determined and at times may insist on leaving the house, and this might be a worry to the worker or visitor who knows this person is going to get lost, or is fairly sure that this person is going to get lost. In this case, it is much better not to confront them or try to stop them from leaving the house, but to try to distract them, either by getting them to make a cup of tea, peel some vegetables, fold washing, sweep leaves. If this doesn't work and the person still insists on leaving, it's much better to go with them, maybe walk round the block and come in the back door talking about the gardens as you go, maybe going into a neighbour's for a cup of tea, or maybe continuing to walk to the milk bar to get a pint of milk and return home again. People with Alzheimer's disease sometimes have visual hallucinations where they may see people or children outside the window or even sitting in the house. It's much better not to argue with them and say that there's definitely nobody there, but to acknowledge that the person can see them but you can't, and distract them into doing something else, either take them into the kitchen again to make a cup of tea or peel vegetables. There are a number of pointers for either living with or working with someone with Alzheimer's disease. It's important not to completely take over and organise the person's household and not to be bossy. People with Alzheimer's disease are more often than not elderly and have rights the same as the rest of us. It's important not to be patronising or treat them like a child. They're not children and shouldn't be treated as such. Again, it's important not to reinforce their deficits, the things that they can no longer do, but to emphasise the skills that they still retain. Another very important thing to remember is not to confront or to argue with the person. It's much better to back off and try again later. That may apply to helping them clean the house, helping them dress, giving them medication, etc. It's very important when visiting or working with somebody to ask their permission to do things. For example, would you mind if I make a cup of tea? How about we do the washing together so that we can have a good gossip? It's very important with people with Alzheimer's disease to promote their self-esteem and self-worth and to maintain that person's dignity.
It's the way people talk to you, as if I'm a child almost. People do tend to treat you as if you are a little bit mental, which hurts. It hurts a lot because, I mean, even young people have a bad memory, don't they? That's what my daughter says to me. Well, I don't know. You remember things that I don't. And I don't feel ill, this is the thing. But it can hurt when people keep reminding you that you've got something wrong with you.
Living each day at a time is a very good maxim for both carers and the person with Alzheimer's disease, particularly if the person with Alzheimer's disease does have some insight. Really to think to either the following afternoon, the next afternoon or the next day is sufficient rather than try to plan for weeks ahead.
I mean, my advice to anybody who has this sort of thing is not to sit down and feel sorry for themselves. Do something. I mean, I do a lot of pressed flower work, and I sew, and I write numerous letters. So I keep myself occupied. That's the best thing to do. I would say take each day as it comes, and do whatever you can. If you can look after yourself, so much the better.
Alzheimer's disease is becoming a much more familiar name to to our society today. It's been referred to as old-timers' disease, the scourge of the age, the epidemic of the 21st century. For carers, it's been likened to an ongoing funeral. And a 70-year-old man who has subsequently died of the disease described it as a complete loss of self. At present, there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease, but what we can do is try our very best to improve the quality of life for both the carer and the sufferer.
On occasions, I have a feeling that people are a little bit afraid of me. See, people that used to come and see me don't come anymore. They don't ring me up. There are two friends that keep on ring me up and chat to me, and that makes me feel, why don't they? You know, I think they're afraid, but why they should be, I don't know. It's unkind of people to behave like that, but one never knows what's round the corner, do you?
Dorothy, how would you like to be treated by people?
Normally.
Now, there is a major problem that confronts anyone with a psychiatric disability, and that affects not only that person, but also everyone associated with that person. And that major hurdle, the major obstacle, is the great stigma that is attached to any psychiatric illness. The so-called normal members of our society fear anyone who's different. But it's vital that the community realise that this very fear diminishes the quality of life, not only of those who are afflicted with any mental illness, but every member of society. As has been pointed out, many people with a mental illness you will never recognise. And why? Well, chances are they're scared. Scared of being recognised for what they might be. Scared of how people will judge them. And these people have been treated very harshly indeed. Not only in the past, but in the present also. In fact, they've been brutalised, both physically and mentally. They've been treated as menaces, dangers to society, in fact, subhuman, or even objects of pity. This is not what they need. There is every good reason for them to be scared. They're not monsters. They're people, just like you and me. Perhaps, in fact, they are you or me.